Hello to all of my comic book geeks, Dante D here, and welcome to the channel, the podcast where we talk about comic books and other geek stuff. We would not have anything to talk about really if it wasn't for the comic book medium and some of the most iconic characters that have come out of comic books. Without the following comic books that I'm going to be talking about today, everything about geekdom and superheroes and things, characters in movies like the Avengers and movies that are even put out by DC, like the Justice League, all of these things would not exist if it weren't for the following comic books. Now, again, this is very subjective. This is very personal, obviously. What I consider to be an iconic comic book, again, might be different for you. I don't know. But overall, I think many collectors and many fans of this medium would agree that the books on this list were significant to this medium. If you disagree, please let me know. And of course, at the end of this episode, I would love to hear from you all and let me know what you think are some of the most iconic books of all time. Now, what I mean by iconic is cultural significance, okay? These books might not even have the best art, okay? They are just culturally significant because of the mark they left on the comic book world. Maybe there was a death or the first appearance of a character, or it was just a comic that really kind of shook the medium. So let's start off with our first book. I think we have about maybe almost 50 on the list, and I'll try to get through them as quick as possible. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, I'm sorry you don't have the visual. I encourage you to check out the video version of this as well at some point. But if you're a huge fan of the medium, you will know these books. So starting off with the first one, which is probably the most famous comic book of all time, and that is Action Comics #1, which is the first appearance of Superman. I cannot underscore how important this book was to the comic book medium, because this was the birth of a genre. This was the birth of the superhero genre and the whole superhero archetype. Every single superhero that exists nowadays in some shape or form is related to Superman. Sorry if you hear my cat in the background. He's trying to get into the room and he misses me. By the way, my cat's name's Loki. Listen to him cry. Not to mention that this is probably also the most collectible, probably the most sought after comic book of all time, and one of the most expensive as well. Like, just unbelievable that this book, just in 2014, a 9.0 of this book sold for $3 million. That is just unbelievable. Of course, following closely behind Action Comics #1 would be the first appearance of Batman, which was in Detective Comics 27. And Batman today is probably, I would say he and Spider-Man are the most popular superheroes of all time, more so than Superman. Batman, there's just a lot more you could do with the character because he doesn't have powers and he's dark and mysterious and he's gray. He's not a Boy Scout, right? So, I mean, what is there not to love about Batman? Batman is actually my personal favorite. I think some of the best stories done in comic books come out of Batman comics. So, obviously, the first appearance of Batman would be a must for this list. And I just love this cover. It is art by Bob Kane. I'm not a really huge fan of Bob Kane, especially what he did to kind of screw over Bill Finger. But that's, again, a topic for another video, another episode of the podcast as well. Actually, we did a video on the channel about how Bob Kane screwed over Bill Finger, and we actually did a live stream where we interviewed Bill Finger's granddaughter, Athena Finger, and we talked at great length about Bill Finger, and really encourage you to check that out if you get the chance. All-Star Comics number 8. This is the first appearance of Wonder Woman, and I just love this cover with all of these Golden Age DC Titans on the front. We have like Hawkman, we have the Spectre, Dr. Midnight. Like, some of these characters don't even exist anymore, but it's a great cover, and this is the first comic that gave us Wonder Woman, who is a huge titan for DC Comics. Superman number 1. Why is this significant? Well, this is the first Superman solo title, actually, and I think this is also the first comic book to ever be dedicated to one character ever. Because all these other books that you're seeing, like Detective Comics, Action Comics, these were all anthology books in the Golden Age. So in Action Comics number 1, you had a short Superman story that was maybe 8 pages or something. But then the stories that followed were about other characters. Like I know in Action Comics number 1 was also the first appearance of a character named Zatara. So there were just all these different characters. Same thing in Detective. Detective did not just feature Batman, it featured other characters as well. As a matter of fact, Detective Comics number 1 didn't even have anyone like Batman. These were all anthology books that contained many different characters. Now you have Superman number 1. You have many. It's still an anthology book. You have, I think, maybe 4 different stories that appeared in Superman number 1, but these were 4 different stories that all dealt with Superman. So this was never done before. A whole book dedicated to one character. That is how popular the guy with the red cape became. And of course, following that, it had to happen. Batman was just as popular pretty much at the time. And of course we get Batman number 1. This also is the first appearance of the Joker. I believe it's also the first appearance of Catwoman. And I have to say, overall, Golden Age writing is really bland. I find Golden Age comics really boring to read because the stories are really crude. They're to the point. There isn't a lot of psychological richness in them whatsoever. But I have to say, these early Batman stories were actually really fun to read. And the first appearance of the Joker, the very first story that you read in Batman number 1 is the first appearance of the Joker. And the story, I have to say, for the Golden Age, it was really kind of ahead of its time. And super, super entertaining story where the Joker is robbing diamonds from all these rich people, and he's going on the radio to announce that he's going to be doing it. Like, such a classic story, and it's kind of been reworked and retold in different ways and referenced to in so many different books. If there are some of you out there that have read Batman, The Man Who Laughs, which is an original Joker graphic novel, they actually reference this first appearance of the Joker in that book, and it was just great. Scott Snyder, in the Death of the Family run, he references characters from this issue as well. It's just, this is such an iconic issue, and it's so important to the Batman mythos. Marvel Comics number 1. Now, Marvel Comics did not become the titan in the comic book industry that it is today until the 1960s. But this is still, nevertheless, a very important comic book because, of course, it is an iconic cover, but it also features the first appearance of the Human Torch, who at the time was not Johnny Storm, member of the Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four actually didn't exist at the time whatsoever, but the Torch did, and I think he was some sort of like a crime-fighting android But then we also had Namor, the Submariner, in this book. So I think I also see Kazar there too. Kazar is another pretty cool character that Marvel did some stories with later on in the 70s, and really cool character. I actually really like Kazar myself. Actually didn't know he was in this book. Look, I learned something new today too. Captain America Comics #1. If you're listening to this as a podcast, I'm sure you're picturing the cover of this book in your head right now. Next to Action Comics #1, I think this is probably the most iconic cover from the Golden Age, just because of the cultural context that this book is coming from. I mean, all these characters are appearing around the time of World War II. So clearly, this cover would have such an effect on the comic book culture. You have Captain America, Steve Rogers, his first appearance, punching Adolf Hitler in the face. And I think this is even before America entered the war. This book launched, I believe it was in 1940. And I think America joined the war not too long after. So it's incredible that the comic books and the comic book industry, they were fighting the war before the actual American soldiers were. So really, really incredible. And I think just the symbolism behind this cover, and the fact that World War II was such a how can I put it, important such an important happening in the 20th century. I mean, this just sums up a lot the early part of the 20th century perfectly, right? So definitely amazing. Flash Comics #1. This is the first appearance of the Flash. He's now obviously he looks a little different. He looked a little different back then. I think with the Flash, they were trying to copy the Greek mythological character Hermes, and just a really kind of a cool character design. Now, obviously, if we had this Flash nowadays, he would look kind of dated, but I think at the time it worked, and he definitely became a huge character for DC Comics. This is All American Comics #16, and this is the first appearance of the Green Lantern. And believe it or not, this is one of the most sought-after books from the Golden Age. I mean, I know Green Lantern's a popular character, but I didn't think he was so popular to the point that this would be one of the most expensive comic books coming out of that age. Like, I think this is the third most expensive comic book coming out of the Golden Age. So I think that's really kind of amazing. I know he didn't get fair treatment in the movies. His movie with Ryan Reynolds was just not great at all. But Ryan Reynolds definitely has made a great comeback for sure. Pep Comics #22. This is the first appearance of Archie Andrews from the famous Archie comics. And Archie to this day is an integral part of our culture. You see Archie whenever you go to the grocery stores. He's actually the only character that is still on the newsstands, which is pretty astounding. But I cannot underscore Archie Andrews' importance in our culture for sure. On this cover here, it's really kind of incredible because you don't even see Archie on the cover. It's the Shield who's on the cover of this comic, but nevertheless, this is the first time that Archie made his appearance in comic books. Crime Suspense Stories #22. This is Frederick Wortham's favorite comic book. And I mean that sarcastically. So this comic book here, nothing really in particular happens in the book that is of note from a narrative perspective. But if you look at the cover, it is a man holding presumably his wife's head after he's beheaded her. And this is such an iconic comic book because if you know a little bit about comic book history, the 1950s was an era where there was kind of a witch hunt against comic books. There was a psychiatrist by the name of Frederick Wortham who believed that juvenile delinquency was a direct result of children reading comic books. And he cited and actually showed this comic book to a Senate subcommittee that was discussing the effects of comic books on youth. He used this as an example, saying like, really, like this is wholesome literature that our kids should be reading. And William Gaines, who was the publisher of EC Comics and pretty much started this whole new trend in crime and horror comics, they questioned him and asked him if he thought that this cover was in good taste. And he said, yes, I do believe it is in good taste. And he basically said it wouldn't be in good taste if they drew the head with blood dripping from it. I just think it's a great story. Actually, a friend of mine who I've had on many of our live streams here, Eric Breen, actually has this book, and he showed it on one of our live streams. And I think this is just such a legendary book. Would love to have it in my collection, but it's a little bit outside of my price range. Detective Comics 31. This is just probably one of the most iconic comic book covers of all time, and it just kind of it really kind of show this image here really embodies what Batman is all about. He's a dark avenger of evil, and for that reason I think this book has become one of the most sought after by collectors. This cover actually has been swiped so many times by artists, most notably Neil Adams. And I believe it was Batman number 227 from the 1970s. And if you're a huge comic book fan, you'll know it's pretty much an upgraded version of this cover, but definitely pays homage to it. Actually, a pretty great issue too. I have all of these issues collected in trade, so a lot of fun to read. Like I said, Batman is the only Golden Age character I can actually read and somewhat enjoy. Detective Comics number 38 is the first appearance of Robin. And Robin started this whole trend of teenage sidekicks. So why teenage sidekicks to begin with? Well, teenage sidekicks were a way for the comic book industry to incorporate characters in their books that children could identify with a little bit more. Stan Lee actually hated teenage sidekicks and clearly never included them in any of his books, but publishers tried to capitalize on the success of Robin by including teenage sidekicks in their books. So that's probably one of the reasons why this is so iconic, because we have our first teenage sidekick coming out of this issue. And come on, Batman and Robin. Like, everybody knows Batman and Robin. They are just the dynamic duo, such an integral part of our culture. Showcase number 4. This is the first Silver Age Flash appearance. And this is actually the book that launched the whole Silver Age. We would not have the Silver Age of comics without this book. This is the book that started the whole superhero revival. The Silver Age was characterized by this return to comic book superheroes, because for a while after World War II, people didn't care about superheroes anymore. The war was over. They didn't need anybody to fight their war for them anymore. So they started looking to other types of genres like Westerns and teenage dramas and romance books and crime and horror, superheroes were not popular at all during the late 40s and 50s. You know, the only superheroes that really essentially survived were Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. Well, when the publishers were so limited with what they could do because of the Comics Code Authority, which kind of was created as a result of the whole Frederick Wortham debacle, they were like, well, we don't know what to do, so let's return to those superheroes, see if we can kind of breathe some life back into them and see if we can make something out of that. And this is pretty much the first time that this happened. This was the book that started it all for the Silver Age and the return of superheroes to comic books. And showcase number 22. This is the first Silver Age appearance of Green Lantern. As you can see, he has a different costume. Also, I should note too, with showcase number 4, this is the Flash's redesigned costume. You can see it's sleek. Looks like it's more out of the Atomic Age. Very different from his Hermes-like outfit from the Golden Age. Same thing with Green Lantern here. We have a new costume for him. Again, sleek. You can really tell that these heroes are coming out of the Atomic Age. Just amazing. I love this art. Not a big Green Lantern fan, but nevertheless, I think this is a great book and definitely one of the most sought after from the Silver Age. Fantastic Four number 1. The most important. This is probably one of the most important books of all time. Especially on this list. I mean, all of these books are the most important of all time, in my opinion, but I think Action Comics number 1 and this book are probably the top on this list. And Fantastic Four number 1 obviously is the first appearance of the Fantastic Four, but this is also the birth of the Marvel Universe. This is the first time ever that readers were getting the sense that all the characters that were being published by Marvel Comics, they appeared in the same universe. And this is the first time that this was ever really done. You can kind of argue a little bit that DC was doing it, with the Batman, Superman team-ups, but it was not done to the extent that Marvel did before. I mean, Marvel just took it to a whole new level. Great business decision, too, in my opinion. Amazing Fantasy number 15. Okay, I lied. Maybe this one is another one of the most important ones next to Action and Fantastic Four number 1. But this is obviously the first appearance of Spider-Man. And it's really kind of ironic that he appeared in what was to be the last issue of a failed science fiction magazine. Martin Goodman, who was the publisher of Marvel Comics at the time, actually hated the idea of Spider-Man because he thought that teenagers only could be sidekicks. They could not be heroes themselves. So Stan was like, well, whatever, this book's failing anyway, so just let me do the story that I want. And turns out that this character ended up being their bestseller. Amazing Spider-Man number 1. Clearly, Spider-Man, because he was so popular, gets his own title, and this is the first solo title dedicated to Spider-Man, which lasted a very, very long time. I don't think they relaunched Spider-Man until the 90s, and then eventually they ended up resuming the original numbering. Yeah, I think 1999 maybe they relaunched Amazing Spider-Man. But anyway, at any rate, they eventually went back to the original numbering from Amazing Spider-Man number 1. So from 1963 to 1990s. And this book was also the first appearance of the Chameleon, if I'm not mistaken. And it's just a great book. Love that cover. Journey into Mystery number 83. This is the first appearance of Thor. Now, Thor, as some of you might know, is not a character that Marvel created. Thor actually is a character from Norse mythology. In Norse mythology, he is the god of thunder. And Marvel took that character from mythology and incorporated it into their own books. And he made his first appearance here and eventually became one of the most popular characters at Marvel, to the point where they included him in the Avengers. He's in the Avengers movies nowadays. It's actually incredible how popular this character has become, because he's not the only character that Marvel has taken from mythology. I mean, Marvel also took Hercules and incorporated Hercules, who's also another mythological character, in their books. But Hercules, unfortunately, never rose to the same heights as Thor. So you had Thor in the Avengers, and then Hercules, I think he was part of a team called the Champions, which had a title back in the 70s. But to this day, I wonder why Hercules never became as popular as Thor. If you know a little bit about that, please let me know for sure. Love to know that. Tales of Suspense, number 39. This is the first appearance of Iron Man. And as you could tell on the cover, Iron Man did not have that hot rod red suit that he's known for today. His suits on the cover of Tales of Suspense 39 is more akin to something you'd see on the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz. But believe it or not, I actually think I like that costume a little better. I think it's kind of cool. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. But I mean, of course, the first appearance of Iron Man is going to be one of the most iconic books, because I mean, to this day, Iron Man is one of the most popular Avengers. And it's actually incredible what Robert Downey Jr. did for the Iron Man character. I think before he hit the screen as the character, Iron Man wasn't really the A-lister that we know him to be today. I think before Robert Downey Jr., he was more of a B-list character. But yeah, because of those MCU movies, he's definitely an A-lister now. Avengers number 1. I love this cover. This is probably one of my favorite covers coming out of the Silver Age. So many colors, and just love it. And we have obviously Loki on the front. Oh, my cat's looking at me now because I just called his name. So we have Loki on the front. We have Thor, Hulk, Iron Man, Ant-Man, and Wasp. Great cover. But this is the first Avengers. We know today how important the Avengers are in our culture, so obviously their first appearance would be super, super iconic, right? Incredible Hulk, number 1. Another one of my favorites from the era. This is actually a really rare book, too. The original run on Hulk only lasted 6 issues, believe it or not. Didn't do as well as Marvel thought he would do. But after 6 issues, he actually joined Submariner. I think it was in Tales to Astonish, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's what it was, Tales to Astonish. But it was one of those anthology books until eventually he became popular enough that they could give him his own title again in the early 1970s. And I think Hulk resumed somewhere around like 102, Hulk 101 or something like that. But yeah, great book, great cover. And Hulk was not always green. He actually was gray. I don't think they made him green until Hulk number 3, if I'm not mistaken. And again, if I'm saying anything incorrectly here, please feel free to correct me. I'm just kind of going from memory here. Avengers number 4. This is the return of Captain America. Up until this point, we hadn't seen Captain America since the Golden Age. And the first Silver Age appearance of Captain America was in Avengers number 4. Great cover. Cap just He's coming at you, Jack Kirby cover. It looks like he's gonna pop out of the book. Like, it's just so cool. And it says Captain America lives again. Like, just such a cool cover. Absolutely love it. And definitely one of the most sought after books from the Silver Age. But Cap, he is considered the first Avenger, right? Even though he's not on the cover of Avengers #1, but he is a Titan for Marvel and one of the most popular characters. So this is definitely an important book in the history of the character. Clearly, to follow is Captain America 100, and this is the first Silver Age solo title for dedicated to Captain America. Very similar to the Avengers #4 cover, with Cap kind of, running out. But as you could see, it's Captain America 100. It's not Captain America #1. What they did here is they just resumed the original numbering from where the Golden Age book left off. And they basically explained it that Captain America was frozen in ice since the end of World War II. Isn't that just incredible how back then they would just resume these books from their original numbering? They don't just relaunch with a whole new #1. And actually, there was an interview with Carmen Infantino that I watched, and he kind of explained why they did that. They didn't just start with a whole new #1. They would just resume with the original numbering. And their reasoning behind that is when people saw that number, they looked at this book and thought, okay, this character is good enough to have, say, 100 issues. So let's check him out. They didn't want to make the character look like he was a brand new character that was going to maybe do well or maybe fail. They wanted to make the character look established. And I thought that was really cool because that is completely contrary to what we have today. Today, publishers will do a whole new #1 like that. Like, I cannot tell you how many times Marvel and DC have relaunched their titles with all new #1s. So Amazing Spider-Man #121. Super important book. Very, very important book. So the death of Gwen Stacy. Some consider this to be the end of the Silver Age because prior to this book, people didn't really die in comic books. So to many, this was the end of the Silver Age because people didn't really die in Silver Age comic books. But now we have that shift to darker stories. This is actually one of my favorite books of all time. Have it in my collection. So happy to have it. And yeah, very powerful issue. Some readers at the time who were obviously around when this book came out were actually comparing this to calling it their Kennedy assassination moment. So really, really cool to think that a comic book can have that much effect on somebody. Fantastic Four #52. This is the first appearance of the Black Panther, and I think this is a super important book, not only because Black Panther is such an important character nowadays, but also because Black Panther is the first black superhero. Prior to this book, most superheroes, actually all superheroes, were all white. So it's the first time that we saw a diverse superhero in the pages of comic books. Now, up until the Black Panther movie came out, Black Panther is another one of those characters that wasn't really considered to be an A-lister like he is today. He was a B-lister, heck, maybe even a C-lister. But now, because of the movie and the popularity of the movie, he definitely has bumped up to high B, maybe even A-list. Uncanny X-Men #94. This is hugely iconic because before Uncanny X-Men #94, X-Men actually was not popular. Like, if I mention the X-Men nowadays, everybody's heard of the X-Men. Everyone loves the X-Men, right? But X-Men wasn't always popular. They did not become popular until Chris Claremont took over the writing duties, and this is the first Chris Claremont on X-Men, from X-Men '94 all the way through until the hundreds and hundreds. He was on X-Men for a really, really long time, and he made the X-Men what they are today. And it all started with this issue. Giant Size X-Men #1. One of the most sought after issues from the Bronze Age. And this is the first appearance of the new X-Men team. So the original X-Men were Jean Grey, Beast, Iceman, and Cyclops. But now you have all these new characters that made their appearance to make the new X-Men. So they added Wolverine in this book. This isn't the first appearance of Wolverine, but I think this is definitely one of his earlier appearances. I don't know if it's his third appearance. Maybe it's his third. I don't know. But it's the first appearance of Colossus, first appearance of Nightcrawler, first appearance of many of these well-known X-Men that we know and love today. Incredible Hulk #181. This is the closest thing that any modern comic or any really Bronze Age comic will ever come to being something like Action Comics #1. Definitely a hugely sought after book. And this is the first full appearance of Wolverine. I cannot say this is the first appearance of Wolverine because then I'll have so many people yelling at me in the comments and on social media saying, that's not the first appearance of Wolverine. Yeah, he had a cameo in 180, but most collectors would consider this to be the first appearance of Wolverine because it's his full appearance. So, love this book. Great cover. One of the most memorable ever. And Wolverine has become one of the most popular heroes of our time. And it all started here, making it probably one of the most iconic books of all time. X-Men #101. This is the first appearance of the Phoenix. And X-Men is known for that Phoenix storyline. When people think X-Men, they think the Phoenix. And this is Chris Claremont work, obviously. And to this day, we will always remember the Phoenix. Phoenix has made appearances in movies. Like, whenever they do X-Men on screen or anything with the X-Men, the Phoenix always comes up at one point or another. So, just really memorable work here. Then, of course, we'd have to have the death of the Phoenix, which happened in X-Men #137. So, 36 issues later, they kill off the Phoenix and subsequently Jean Grey. Now, she stays dead for a very long time, but eventually they do bring her back. Great issue. If you haven't read it, I definitely would recommend it. But, this just completes that whole Phoenix storyline that the X-Men are known for. Star Wars #1. This is the first ever Star Wars comic book. First time we see Star Wars in print as a comic. And this book saved Marvel Comics. The late 70s was a tough time for comic book publishers, Marvel and DC both. And Star Wars is what saved Marvel Comics. Actually, I think Star Wars outsold Amazing Spider-Man at one point, which is huge. So and we can't underscore Star Wars' popularity in our pop culture nowadays. I myself am a huge Star Wars fan, as you all know. So definitely a great book. And those early Star Wars stories, again, they're kind of dated by today's standards, but they're really enjoyable and classic nevertheless. So definitely one of the most iconic books of all time. Green Lantern Green Arrow #76. This is the famous Black Skins issue. Now, Green Lantern Green Arrow is a book that is really well known from the 1970s. This is Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams work. And Denny O'Neil was a well-known hippie, and he really wanted to call a lot of attention to social issues at the time. And Green Lantern Green Arrow was his avenue for doing that. And this is the first issue that started this whole socially relevant Green Lantern Green Arrow. And one of the most reprinted panels in comic books comes from this, and that is the famous Black Skins panel, wherein you see a black man who's pretty much gone through hell, and he says to the Green Lantern, "Well, you've done so much for the orange skins and the purple skins on these planets, but what have you done for the black skins, Mister Green Lantern?" And he's like, I have nothing to say to that. Like, I haven't done anything. And he's ashamed of himself. And the following issues deal with, overpopulation and pollution and religion and drugs, and the famous drug issue as well. That's another notable one. I don't think I have it on this list, but the famous drug issue with Speedy, Green Arrow's ward, shooting up on the cover. Another hugely significant book from the era. Unfortunately, though, people didn't really want to read about social relevance, and the book was canceled. I think by issue 100, it was canceled. So, people didn't really want to be preached to, unfortunately. Batman 227. This is the cover swipe that I was talking about earlier on in the episode of Detective Comics 31. This is just a really notable cover from the era. This is Neil Adams' work, cover swipe, and highly collectible, definitely, and highly sought after by collectors. Wolverine number 1. Now, Wolverine became a juggernaut in the Marvel Comics world and in the comic book world in general, very, very quickly, to the point where he made his debut in 1975, and I think by the 1980s, early 1980s, he's getting his own title. Now, mind you, this was a limited series. It only lasted 4 issues, but this is Chris Claremont and Frank Miller work. Highly recommend reading it if you haven't, but it's the first time that Wolverine gets his own title, and then a few years later, he actually got his own ongoing series. So that was Wolverine Volume 2, number 1, with him standing over all these dead bodies. Dark Knight Returns. This is one of the most seminal works in comic books of all time, and definitely deserved a spot on this list. And I call this the birth of Batman as we know him. Now, we could say that Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams made an effort to return Batman to his darker roots in the 1970s, especially after the campy portrayals that we got in the 60s with the Adam West Batman TV show. But I don't think the Batman as we know him today, that the dark avenger of evil, I don't think we saw him until Dark Knight Returns. I mean, the 70s Batman, yeah, he was a little dark, but he was really slender, and he kind of at times reminded me of like the Roger Moore James Bond. I know I've said this before. Just wasn't really how I picture Batman, but the way I picture Batman is definitely how Frank Miller portrayed him in The Dark Knight Returns. And I think in this book, Frank Miller created a new template for The Dark Knight that carries on into our time today. I mean, this book was just so ahead of its time. It's just incredible. So definitely, if you haven't read this, go out and get it. It's amazing. And of course, Watchmen redefined the comic book industry. So if Dark Knight redefined Batman and gave us a new template for Batman, I think Watchmen redefined the comic book industry, because prior to this point, the comic book industry was fighting against this stigma of comic books being just for kids. I mean, heck, this is a stigma that to a certain extent still exists today, but Watchmen is the comic book that showed us that comic books are mostly not for kids anymore. And Alan Moore, what he did with the superhero genre here is just incredible. He unpacks the idea of what a superhero is and tries to envision them in our real world. I mean, because come on, if you want to put on a costume and go fight evil and go fight crime, I mean, there's got to be something wrong with you mentally, right? So I think he really kind of delves into that quite a bit with this book, and it's kind of satirical commentary on the comic book industry in a sense, even though it's a very dark work, and again redefined the comic book industry as being more for adults. This is actually the only comic book that Time listed on their top 100 novels of all time, so definitely deserves to be on this list. Batman, The Killing Joke. And this is the birth of the Joker as we know him. The Joker went through many iterations throughout his 80-year history. And the Joker that we know today, I feel, was born in The Killing Joke. One of my favorite Batman comics, one of my most favorite Batman comics of all time. And highly recommend to add this to your collection if you do not have it or have not read it. This is the psychopathic Joker that we know and love today, and Alan Moore really redefined the Joker for a new generation. Batman 428. It's the death of Robin. This is the first comic book I think that ever got media attention. People just went nuts when they found out Robin died. Now, they thought it was the Dick Grayson Robin. They didn't know it was the Jason Todd. His name slipped my mind for a second. Sorry. The Jason Todd Robin. Again, crazy. And I really like what DC did with this book. They actually let the fans decide if Robin was going to die or live with this 1-900 number that they had at the back. Clearly people voted for him to die because not a lot of people liked Jason Todd. New Mutants 98. New Mutants 98 is the first appearance of Deadpool. And Deadpool is a huge titan, huge juggernaut in the comic book world and in pop culture today. And this is the first time he ever made an appearance. Great book, very highly sought after, very expensive, but collectors just go nuts for it. Amazing Spider-Man 300, first full appearance of Venom, because he made a cameo in 299, but the first full Venom was in Amazing Spider-Man 300. Wow, what a book this was, and heck, wow, what a character Venom is. And it all started here. X-Men #1. This is the Jim Lee, Chris Claremont X-Men from 1991. This is a record-selling comic book. I think every single person watching this that collects comic books probably has this comic in their collection, but it is worth it. I thought, great story. I personally love it and loved it. Not very expensive book, and you should be able to add it to your collection rather cheaply if you don't have it. But every comic book collector needs to have this in their collection. It's a record seller, okay? It is estimated that 8 million copies of this book sold. Now, mind you, I know those numbers are probably not super accurate because people were buying multiple copies, and you had all these special edition covers and variant covers and whatever. But at the end of the day, a comic book up until this point had never sold that many copies ever, not even in the golden age. So it's pretty astounding. Spawn #1. I think this is a hugely iconic comic book because I don't think there exists any independent character today that is as popular as Spawn. Todd McFarlane created Spawn, and this book here alone, as an independent comic, sold over 1 million copies. Like, nowadays, that's unheard of. Like, no independent comic is going to sell. Hell, an independent comic would be even lucky to sell 50,000 copies nowadays. Hot books nowadays sell 100,000 copies. So, wow. Todd McFarlane did well with himself with this character. I personally love Spawn. I'm a huge fan. I have it in my collection. I have the trades. Great character. Love reading Spawn. And, like I said, I think this is a hugely important comic book because it's the first time that an indie comic book I broke through that glass ceiling of comic book corporatism. So, great milestone here. Amazing Spider-Man number 361 is the first appearance of Carnage, another huge character villain. Coming out of the 1990s. Love Carnage. Recently made an appearance in a Venom movie, and Carnage is just one of the most beloved villains coming out of Marvel, and he made his first appearance in 361. And definitely, this is one of the most sought after comics coming out of the 90s. Batman number 497. This is the famous breaking of the bat issue. Now, in the 90s is known for comic book companies trying a lot of these gimmicks to increase the perceived collectability of their comics. This is one of the gimmicks that was tried, and it was successful. This book did rather well. Story-wise, one of my favorite Batman storylines of all time. I love Batman Nightfall. It was this huge maxi series. I think, what was it, 20 issues maybe? Great story. Loved it. And if you haven't read Nightfall, check it out. To this day, this is one of the most memorable Batman stories coming out of the Batman mythos period, and definitely one of the most memorable stories coming out of the 90s. And of course, we have the death of Superman, Superman 75. This is a 3 million copy seller right now. People went nuts when Superman died, and they thought that for sure that he was going to stay dead forever. My, how those people were foolish. And you know for sure they were not comic book fans, because true comic book fans know that people in comic books, especially huge corporate characters like Superman, never stay dead. I think they actually kept him dead for maybe about a year, and then clearly they brought him back. People went nuts over the death, but when they finally brought him back, nobody cared. Death of Superman, actually, believe it or not, is one of my favorite Superman runs. But to a lot of collectors and a lot of people, they tend to ignore it because they feel that the death of Superman is everything that was wrong with comic books in the 1990s, and they actually kind of blame this comic for the bursting of the collector's bubble and the crash of the comic book market, because like I said, when he came back, no one cared, and there were all these unsold copies of the Return of Superman, right? So but nevertheless, this book, this was a media circus with this book, and just went nuts. Like, there were people that legitimately thought they were going to be able to retire off of this book or be able to put their kids through college. Like, if you go on YouTube right now and search Death of Superman news reports, you will find news reports of there's this one lady that's like, I'm going to put my baby through college with this. Like, it's nuts. It's ludicrous that people thought this, but nevertheless, it happened. And if you could ignore all of the hype around this book and you just read it for the story, it's great. My favorite Superman story of all time. And that's about it. That's my list. As you can see, I don't have any books from the modern era here, just because I'm not a huge fan of the modern era, and I don't really think that any books in the last 20-25 years really left their mark on the industry quite like, say, a book like The Death of Superman. But that's my list. If you feel like I left out any books, please let me know. I would really like to hear what some of the books that you feel are the most iconic. Love to hear from you all. Please reach out to me in the comments or reach out to me on social media. Always love interacting with you. As always, thank you so much for joining me here weekly. Love talking comic books and other geek stuff with you all the time. Till next time, this is Dante D signing off. I will see you all in the next episode.